about 4 months pregnant. I looked like a little Teletubby, like a little ring. And met Brian in New York, and we got engaged at the top of the Empire State Building.
Hello. Today I'm talking with Jo Price, or as my family likes to call her, Pricey. This podcast will sound like a soap opera. You could potentially make a movie out of Jo's life. Her story includes ghosts, infidelity, flying on one of the last Concords, someone in a coma, a union protest, a white Steinway piano, and a basement full of champagne. And it ends with Jo helping to build Dignity Moves, an interim supportive housing initiative in California. I just want to say a massive thank you to my subscribers. There's not many of you, but I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for listening. All right, Pricey on the ones and twos. Let's have it.
Did you know about my speech impediment?
Speech impediment? No, I never would have guessed.
I never talked for the first 10 years of my life. Like for the first 3 years, the only person who could understand me was my sister, who's a couple of years older than me. She used to interpret for me. And so with my family, they had a hard time understanding what I was saying. So I could actually swear and get away with it because my sister would cover for me, because my older brother would be teaching me how to swear with every letter of the alphabet. When I went to school, my nan would say, "Oh, what did you have for lunch?" And I'd be like, "Oh." Like I used to talk like that. When I was in school, a lot of people couldn't understand me. So I was made fun of a lot and teased, and that stuck with me for a good couple of decades into my life.
Yeah, I didn't know, and I've known you since my late teens. I've always looked up to you, Jo. You just sort of dive into life. You got grit and determination.
Yeah. Yeah, it's courageous and just jump straight in. Just like you creating this podcast, that must have been a heavy lift for you.
Yeah, I think I'm going through a midlife crisis, actually. Talk to me about the photograph you sent me. There's balloons behind you. You're looking very fit. Balloons, there's a 1, 0, and 8, so 108. What's that all about?
So 108 in the Sanskrit calendar, I should have this memorized, but it has a very meaningful connotation in yoga. It's about the 108 poses, the way the sun moves and the moon moves around the sun, and something like that. It's very meaningful. So every year at my yoga studio, and I've been going to my yoga studio since I moved to Menlo Park. So 18 years ago, I was just about to deliver Jemima. But in recent years, they've had this yoga challenge. So in the month of February, you try and do as many classes as you can, or at least one class a day. So it started off a couple of years ago, and I kind of got to 30. Hey, one a day, that was great. Then I thought, well, why don't I just do 2 a day and get to 60? I got to 60. And then I thought, well, what the heck? Why don't I just go for 90? So last year, it was about a week before the challenge was over. And I think I was something like 66, 68. And I realized that if I just floored it for the last week, I'd get to 90. And no sooner had I done 90 at the end of the month, I'm like, you know what, next year I think I'm going to do 108. And as it was coming out of my mouth, there was a couple of people next to me. I'm like, why the fuck did I just say that? There was no need to go and challenge myself even more. I kind of been fretting inside because I'm like, okay, how am I going to do 108? Working full time, trying to keep the house in check and just keep my sanity. But I thought when I got into January, I thought, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to dive straight in. And it's like as soon as you do it, like that first day, I was in it, Lucy. And my mindset kind of changed. And I knew I had to do about 4 classes a day, every day for the month of February, and nothing else could get in my way. So even though I was working, I'd get up extra early. I was going up at 3:30, 4 a.m. I do 2 classes in the morning and then about 2 or 3 in the evening. But I was just hella focused. I was nothing, when something kind of rattled me, I just keep a cool head. No, I gotta go yoga. I'll be okay. And the yoga was the easiest part of it because all I had to do was get to the studio, be on my mat, and I was working out for myself. So that was fun. It was when you come out of the studio and you have all this noise and work going on and the goals we put on yourself. That's all mental, it's all in here. But when we kind of just look to what we want to do, it was 10 times easier for me.
Whoa. Okay, I get that. You just had to show up for yourself. But 4 times a day. Bloody hell. What the fuck?
I look back, I was like, how did I fit it in? How didn't I lose my cool? There was only one time I lost my cool, and it was towards the end. And I got into class, and it was a slower class. So I'm easier on the hot classes and the fast classes. So I knew I'd have to be, it was more mental. And as soon as I got in, the teacher triggered me. And I'd said something about like my back, and she said, "Oh, well, don't hunch over." And then she mimicked an old lady at the front of the class, and it triggered me because it reminded me of a really mean school teacher I had in my primary school. So when I was about 5 or 6, and I'd gone into the teacher's class to ask for something, and this teacher turned around and said, "Oh, tell your teacher to send somebody who could speak properly."
Why do you think you had a speech impediment? How did you overcome it?
I had to go to speech therapy for the first 10 years. So all the way through primary school to about the age of 10 or 11, every Friday morning I'd go to speech therapy for an hour and a half. And at first I used to, because I was different and I was being called out of class, it would kind of make me shy. But then I turned it around, and in the later years, it was like, "Hey, fuck you, other students. I'm going out every Friday morning for 2 hours." And my mum would spoil me at the local store with like sweets or chocolates. So it was actually good to go to school every Friday for 2 hours.
Oh, you turned that shit around. That is the Joe I know and love.
I turned it around, but even when I first started working in London, I could hear it a little bit in my head, and it would knock my confidence a little bit. But then over time, and maybe that's why I'm like, what do they call it? Like those A-type personalities, and you keep pushing and pushing. You kind of push yourself so I'm more comfortable talking. But it's common in siblings who are quite close together in age that they might bond, and they have a special language that they develop between themselves.
Obviously, very close to your sister then. We met through my brother and my sister-in-law. How did you meet them?
It was the summer of 96. And then Yvette and I worked on a project called Chicksands, about 10 miles north of Luton. And it's a former USAF base. And we were designing it, co-locating the Defense Intelligence, Army, Air Force, and Navy into this campus. So we lived on this campus, just a couple of us with some like frat army kids and a colonel, and we lived there for the entire summer. And we had like, one of those summers where you all kind of bond and you're just in the same place, but it's the most amazing summer you can think of. And we done Ouija boards, and we done like there was an old priory that was the 11th century priory, and they'd have like ghost hunts. So you'd stay up all night and listen to the ghosts. You think this would like be crazy, yeah? Like crazy people do this kind of stuff. But it was the local police chief, and he was heading up the local like ghost society. And because Chicksands was this ancient monument, like, centuries old, it was believed to be haunted.
Ooh.
And this one night, do you remember my brother Lewis?
Yeah, I know Lewis.
Yeah, Lewis. So he'd come up. He used to come up for the weekends. And we were in this priory, and my chair, like, remember like the flagstones, in the old houses and cottages and farmhouses, it was like the flagstone. And I was on this chair, and I accidentally scraped it back. And this cop come running down the hallway. He's like, "Do you hear that? Did you hear that?" And I just kind of played along. When we done the Ouija board, there was a hedgehog who came, and it appeared. And on the Ouija board, it said something about this hedgehog, that this kid had died in the little book on site. And this,
So literally a hedgehog appeared, and then the Ouija board said something about a hedgehog.
oh, it was weird, but that kind of strange experiences like that.
Oh. Do you believe in
The
ghosts?
universe is all connected and there's energies. And just last week, a friend of mine bought me a reading with a clairvoyant, but there was a couple of things that come out of it. So my grandfather told me that I needed to get my citizenship, that I should apply. And at the end of the reading, a good friend of mine, Maggie, who died when I was about 26, she came through. And this lady, she was like, God, I'm getting a friend. She's coming through like Margaret. Oh, but she doesn't go by Margaret. It's a shortened name. Maggie. And she said, look, your friend's in a great place. And she takes responsibility for her death. She died of alcoholism and anorexia. And she's valued our friendship. But there's not many people I've told that story to. Nobody. And it came through.
Whoa, that gave me chills. Yeah, listen to your granddad. You should get your citizenship. Both your kids were born here.
Yes.
Tell our listeners how you got to America.
Originally, just so you remember Brian. So I was dating Brian. So about 2001, Brian was, he worked for Ovarup in London, the big global engineering company. And in order to be promoted, they encourage you to go and do a work stint abroad. So originally we were going to go to New York, and we had that posting, he had that posting arranged. Then he went to Ibiza, and like round about September the 9th in 2001. And that was when the 9/11 Twin Towers hit.
Oh.
He was partying on a beach in Ibiza, and I was in central London. I was just in a meeting at the Barbican and come out, and London was eerily quiet. And we'd walked past a store, and all the televisions in the store was like, showing the Twin Towers. And so his posting to New York, of course, got cancelled. I moved to the Caribbean for a year. When I was with Shao, I lived in Trinidad and Tobago for a year. And then when I come back, and then Brian found out he had a post into San Francisco. And then he had a going away party, and I was with your sister-in-law. I was with Yvette. We were on the King's Road. Do you remember my flat in London?
Yes, your gorgeous flat in Chelsea. I do apologize for vomiting in your bathroom. I'm not sure I made the toilet complete.
Yeah, in Chelsea. So then we went out because Brian was going away. It wasn't exactly clear if I was going away with him. And we went to the bar across the street. I was like, I've been feeling a bit sickish. Went and done like the pregnancy test and found out I was pregnant. That was the night he was leaving.
Oh my
And
God,
so
the night he was leaving, you found out you were pregnant with Noah. Oh, Joe.
that was a lot to handle. And then in the April, came out to see Brian, and it was fine. And I was going to have the baby in Chelsea. And then in the July 4th, and July 4th happened, and I met Brian in New York City. I flew Concorde.
Wow, one of the last ones?
Yeah, it was one of the last flights, and I took the Concorde to New York. Let's do the math, April, May, June, July. I was about 4 months pregnant. I looked like a little Teletubby, like a little ring. And met Brian in New York, and we got engaged at the top of the Empire State Building.
I remember that. Oh, that's lovely.
And then in the August, we found out that his company could put me under the healthcare. Like, you know how difficult it is to get healthcare in this country. And this was before Obamacare. So he got me on his insurance as a significant other. So then I came here, and I was literally 9 months pregnant. It was early September. And I literally turned up with a baby in my belly and like my purse on, my handbag on my shoulder. And here I am 21 years later.
So that's how it transpired. Do you have an engineering degree?
I have a degree at first class honors in architecture, building planning, and environmental studies from UCL Bartlett School. So in my first year of college, I studied under Sir Norman Foster for my architectural component of my degree. And then in 1999, I went back, I studied part-time my master's at the University of Reading, and I did it in my master's in project management with a major in private finance initiatives or public-private partnerships.
Highly educated woman, Jo. So you came over to San Francisco 9 months pregnant. I'm guessing you weren't working. You were going to take your maternity leave.
I was going to take my maternity leave. So by the time I got here, Brian was established in his job. He was established in his friend sets. So I kind of walked in pregnant, knowing nobody, no job. I was taking a year off with maternity leave. And then it turned out that Brian was a womanizer and Brian liked to party and Brian didn't realize that leaving me home every Friday and Saturday night was the right thing to do. And so, and then I learned that he was dating a belly dancer.
A belly dancer?
A belly dancer, because she'd phone me.
Oh, Jo, those are some rough times. I do remember you talking to my mum. I know the Welsh women stick together.
Yeah.
From what I understand, that belly dancer, she didn't realize Brian was married with a child.
Just before I did the yoga challenge, and I was like shitting myself how I was going to do like 4 classes a day in 30 days. I thought about all the challenging times that I've been through in my life.
Jo, yoga's nothing compared to what you went through with Brian. And listeners, it gets worse.
Yeah, the yoga was frigging nothing. It honestly, it was physical and it was a bit of mental, just, like Nike says, just do it. But it was on the lead up, it was, hey, the speech impediment, hey, it was coming to America, hey, it was going over Brian's like womanizing, hey, it was like all the people he slept with that called me. Then it was his illness. Do you remember we split up? And I thought, I don't need this. And then we got back together, and that's when Jemima was born. The very next day, I conceived. I was sick every day of that pregnancy for 9 months with Jemima. I knew the moment I'd conceived up until I delivered, sick every day, but she's beautiful. And we came together. God, when I was about 40, I suppose, and maybe this was my midlife crisis. But Brian, I was together with Brian. Like the kids were about 5. Noah's 3.5 years older, so about 8.5. And it was like every Saturday, it was like he'd just go and fall asleep in front of the TV. And like things like communications broke down and it got really weird. And we were not communicating to the point of, I used to work in, Silicon Valley. So I worked in San Jose, Brian worked in San Francisco. So I had the car, so I was normally picking up the kids. But it got to the point where, when relationships break down, it's normally communication. And we'd kind of put our schedules on a whiteboard. It was like weird. And it was a Friday night, and I got a call from the school, or Friday afternoon. It's like, oh, where's you picking up the kids? I said, oh, Brian's picking them up. And it's like, that's odd. I said, well, look, I'll come down now and I'll come up and pick up the kids. Couldn't reach Brian. And I started phoning like hospitals, and I know it just felt weird, Lucy. And I was like, well, where could he be? And it was just about the time where Find My iPhone came out. So this was about 2012, about 2012. And have a guess where he was?
Where?
He was on a street in Beijing.
What?
He was on a street in Beijing.
What? How the hell? For what? Work or just up and left?
He was designing, so OVARP at the time, they were designing a bunch of buildings for the Olympics. So you can check like the timeline. It was about 2012, I thought it was. And so he was on a street in Beijing, and I texted. I said, well, Brian, didn't you think it was important to tell me if you were leaving the country and leaving for like 2 weeks? And he's like, well, we weren't really talking. I said, we have 2 kids. And didn't think nothing of it, Lucy. It was, okay, this is going on. And it got to the point where, do I want to live my life in this relationship? I feel that there's more for me. I was regurgitating a lot of the history on when I first arrived, how I was treated. And I want to be treated like a queen, like any woman. Yeah, you want to be loved and adored. And I thought, if I don't move now, I'm just going to wallow in it. And I didn't want to have regret. And that was when I made moves to move out of the house. And at the time, Brian said, well, look, let's just divide the kids in two. I'll take Jemima, you take Noah. And
No.
I was like,
No.
it wasn't even to me. It was in front of the kids. And I'm like, well, this is a strange one. I was like, this, like, I definitely don't want to be with a person who just wants to split the kids like that. Yeah, I do remember speaking to your mum around that time, and it was just like you feel very alone, I suppose, when you have like a relationship come to an end, especially like being so far away from family and friends. But it also makes you who you are, made me stronger. And for the first time in my life, I was on my own, and I realized that I didn't need to be in a relationship to be whole, and that I could get everything I wanted on my own, I suppose. But just having that strength and ability, and it's like when I look back on it, Lucy, like I'm so much stronger now, like 10 times stronger than I was even 10 years ago. It's about 10 years ago when Brian had his op. So yeah, the complete communication breakdown. I moved out, and the day I moved out, it was like a weekend. It was Sunday, and we were packing up the kids. And like bearing in mind, we'd been through the attorneys and we'd reached an agreement. We were going to have the kids like 3 days a week, and then the other one would take them 4 days in the weekend. You know, weekend on, weekend off. That's, if you're in the divorce world, you know that kind of agreement. Noah was about 11 at the time, which means Jemima was about 7.5, 8.5. They didn't want to be spending time with Brian. They didn't, they were scared going over there. Noah asked me, I picked him up one day and he said, Mum, you'll never leave me, will you? And I was like, that's an odd thing for a kid to say. Yeah. I was like, of course I'm never going to leave you. And then some of the soccer dads started asking me, oh, like, is Brian okay? He keeps fainting, or you're having a conversation with him and he phases out. And it's like, weird. And then going back to the school pickup, Brian didn't pick up the kids again. It was his time of having the kids on. And I called his office, and his office said, oh, the ambulance came and picked him up. He's over in Berkeley. And so I phoned Berkeley, and the doctor said, I am so glad you called, Joanne, because Brian said that, you know, he's going to allow me to tell you what's going on. And he said, I remember, you know, sat on my bed, and it kind of hits you like a bit of a truck. And the doctor said to me, like, you sitting down, he said, Brian's got a massive brain tumor. He needs immediate surgery, and he needs to put his affairs in order, which is code for this doesn't look pretty, and there's a high chance of him dying or being terminally like brain injured. And I immediately phoned Brian, and he was driving down the 101. I'm like, you fucking dickhead, like, get off the freeway. Got a massive brain tumor. You can faint at any moment. You could have a crash, not only kill yourself, you can kill other people on the freeway. I said, I'm picking up the kids and we're moving in with you. And I met him that night, and it was clear, like the whole life, like, when you've seen somebody who's ill, like the whole life force of Brian was sucked out of him. And if you remember Brian, he was like so charismatic and charming, and he could light up a room. When I saw him that night, it was like the lights had gone off. He was talking to the kids as if he was about to die, and he was asking them what they were going to do with their lives after, like, go to college. And Jemima was playing tennis at the time, and Noah was playing soccer. I just went into this mode of, oh, I need to help you. You need to be in a better headspace. We're here for you. Because bear in mind, all our family and friends were back in London, the UK. And I moved in, and we had 2 weeks to get to him geared up for this operation. And basically this tumor was the size of like a baseball, and it was right at the top of the spinal cord. And so it was a very precarious operation, going to be like 12 hours. And I remember saying to him, I was like, well, do you think you better phone, like, where's your mum? Like, where's your mum, your sister? And I called them. He said, oh, well, I called them. And when I called them, he literally said, hey, I'm going in for an operation on Friday. You can come and visit me Monday. I said, well, where the hell are you? Oh, well, Brian said he's having this brain tumor removed on Friday, and we can go out like after he's had the operation. And I'm like, what part of brain tumor haven't you understood? Like, this is, Brian has to put his affairs in order. Like, he could die in this operation very, very easily. Plus, they're removing a brain tumor, and his personality is going to be a lot different from what we know. And when the doctor was telling me that, Lucy, I was like, well, what does that even mean? Like, he's going to come out with a different personality. And if somebody was to say that to you, like, what would you think?
Jesus, that is so frightening. That's so frightening.
Is he going to speak? And they're like, well, we don't know if he can speak. We don't know if his hearing's going to be affected, if it's eyesight. And so I had the conversation with him. I said, look, if you end up like a cabbage, well, what do I have to do? Do I keep you on life support or not? And he's like, well, no, I don't want to be like a cabbage. And like, okay, great. But we'll come on to that, because he did end up like a cabbage. But I will say, having spent that 2 weeks with him, and we went to the beach and we'd done things as a family, he got better. Like, but by the time we left him in the hospital, he was actually quite upbeat. So when I first went, like, and we moved in, he was very downbeat. And I was like, if you have that attitude going into this operation, you're never going to come out. So everything is going to be fine. You'll be fine. At the end of the operation, I think it was like 6 o'clock, I got back to Stamford, and I went up to see Brian. He's in ICU. And for people, when they say, oh, he's in stable condition, what that really means is that he had so many pipes and tubes and bleeps and medications going in to like stabilize the pressure on the brain and his blood pressure and to help him breathe. It was friggin' scary. The doctor said, oh, Brian, move your fingers. And Brian's lying there and he starts moving his fingers. So it's like, well, great. At least you didn't do that. You've done a pretty good job if he's moving his fingers after like a 12-hour operation. And it meant that things were still connected to the brain. So I went home to the kids. I thought everything's going to be fine. The next day, I was sat in the garden and I got a phone call. And it was the hospital, and they said, you better come quick. Like, Brian's brain had exploded,
Oh,
and the right side had exploded into the left side. And they said they're not sure if he's going to recover. And then he stayed in a coma for like 6 weeks. He was just sleeping. And bear in mind, because we had separated, he started seeing this other girl. He started coming out of the coma, and she would be at his bedside night and day. Like, she was a graphic designer, so she could work from home. And at the time, I was like, okay, a little cuckoo, but I had the kids to look after, and I was trying to keep things normal for them. And then I get a call from the hospital, and they said, oh, Brian's waking up. And I'm like, oh, well, that's great. He started to move. So I go down to the hospital and I meet with the social worker, and they said, look, we're going to move him to a rehab just north of San Francisco. And we sat down on the bed, and because I had, like, we were still married at the time, Lucy, when the social worker starts talking to me. And I said, well, it's a bit complicated. It's a bit like Dallas, like the soap operas. And there's me, the wife who's like separated, and then the crazy girlfriend. And Brian laughed. And the social worker, she said, oh, did you see that? And I went over to Brian, like, so I'm sat at the base of Brian's bed. He's on one of those medical beds, so it's quite high up. And I walked over to him and I held his hand and I said, oh, Brian, if you can understand me, flutter your eyelashes. And he fluttered his eyelashes. So I said, well, this is okay. They're going to move you to like rehab north of San Francisco. So they move him to Marin. And then I started getting the phone calls. Oh, Brian's fallen out of bed like once or twice. Because remember when Violet was a baby and she'd start moving and rolling over?
Yeah.
Literally how Brian was. So when he was in Stanford, like that vision of someone who's a cabbage, it was true. That was Brian. And when he got to Marin, he had such great work, like rehab. He had to learn to walk, talk, feed himself. And he was fortunate to be in this country on really good healthcare benefits. Thank you to who was his company, lighting company. Thank you. But they gave him access to some of the best rehab in the world.
Yeah.
When he was being moved, so he went to Marin. Then when he exhausted those medical benefits, they moved him to Berkeley to Walter Bates, another good rehab center. And then they got him into a rehab center in Bakersfield. And this is when, like, bearing in mind the family were kicking off in the background, typical family dynamics and what are you doing with Brian? And I said, he's fortunate to have access to the best medical care system in the world here. And I'm going to send him to Bakersfield. Yes, it's several hours away. And the crazy girlfriend called me. She said, you can't move Brian there. It's like, how am I going to do my yoga? I'm going to have to wear a wetsuit. Right, she done a hot yoga for her joints or something. And because there was no classes, she's like, well, I'll have to wear a hot suit into like the yoga class so it would work double as well. Or some crazy stuff. And I remember turning around and saying, Corey, I'm not interested in your yoga. I'm interested in Brian's health and his ability to regain as much self-sufficiency as possible. And we should all be encouraging that. Well, there's like what's called a medical directive in this country.
Yeah.
And we're in the medical center and Brian's showing us what he can do. He's in a wheelchair at this point. He was working with some cards. He was like, hey, we're in a kitchen. What's dangerous here? And Jemima was sat next to him and he was getting the answers wrong. And Jemima was like, well, no, Dad, it's like, look, you can't leave the pan on the stove. And I tell you that story to give you an idea of where his mental capacity was. And it was about 50%. So then we had what's called a family meeting. And I was in the room next to Brian in his wheelchair and he's holding my hand. And on the screen, it is his like crazy ex-girlfriend and the family. And bear in mind, they just told me that Brian's got 50% mental capacity. And then next thing I know, it's like I'm being ambushed. And they're like, right, Brian, who do you want to make your medical decisions? Who do you want to make your financial decisions? Who do you want to control your affairs? And then he points to the screen, right? So he gives up everything to the girlfriend.
Oh, you're kidding.
And I'm like,
Why are they asking him this?
I know. And so I was so floored. I stood up, I said, this is just bullshit. You've just said to me he's got 50% capacity and now he's going to hand over all his financial, medical, health, life directives and care to a person he's just known barely 12 months. So I walked out, and I'm like, that's it. And I did, everything went over to the girlfriend. Fast forward barely 6 months, his sister calls me, hey, have you heard from Brian? We can't reach Brian. Corey's going crazy, asking for more money, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I am done with it. I've explained this to you. Like, you've known me. I've got the 2 kids. Everything I've done is in Brian's best interest. If that's not good enough, like, you work with Corey. And that was must have been 2015, Lucy. And then every now and again I'd get a random call. Hey, can you help us with Brian? Um, we don't think that Corey's looking after Brian. She's not helping him connect with the family on the FaceTime. This must have been about 2017. And Brian's elder daughter calls me, hey, Joe, I'm in LA. I'm going to pick up Brian. And the kids just looked at me. It's like, if you were going to be in LA, why didn't you phone me? We could have come down to meet with you, and we could have seen, like, they could have seen their dad. But what she literally did was kidnap Brian from a yoga studio and have a police escort. No joke. It's like Dallas. Yes. So she said, oh, well, I'm going to pick up Brian because Corey's not letting us have access to Brian. So she met Brian. She found Brian at a local yoga studio with Corey. She took him back to the apartment, got his stuff and his passport, and then jumped on a plane back to London.
Oh, wow. That's how it went down? Was it kind of like a relief when he left the country, though? Or when he.
It was like the whole like debacle. At least he was back with the family, and he moved in with his mum and his brother.
So, as far as you know, how is Brian doing?
He can, so he can walk, he can talk. In 2019, I took the kids back for the summer, and we turned up on their doorstep just to say hi. So we went out for a meal. The kids and Brian randomly text. And did you hear about the Tesla story?
Yeah, that's a kind gesture to get a car from your dad.
You know, if that's a way of making up for lost time, or in like a young child's mind, that's love. And you can think of dad every time you drive the Tesla. Have at it, yeah. Have some fun.
Let's talk about your work with the homeless.
Jemima was 1 year old, and I thought, great, I'm gonna have a year off and just hang out with the baby. It didn't happen like that. I got headhunted for a company up in San Francisco, and they were basically buying up real estate like you and I would buy shoes. And they were buying buildings to nurse them back to health. I thought, well, this is okay. And it was a Turkish company, and they were buying these buildings for the kids' inheritance. Yeah.
Wow, they had boatloads of money then.
Loads of money. But it was also a really fun gig. So we were buying up buildings built in like 1908, 1910, like the old downtown San Francisco buildings. And we just do a bunch of tenant improvements. So I was working with Mabel at the time, and she was working her way through Art Academy. Was it the San Francisco Art Academy or the Academy of Art in San Francisco?
Yeah.
So it was like we had like different designs for different tenants, and we could do like the whole decor, and we were remodeling bathrooms and the hallways, and like the elevator. It was the only downtown building that had the last remaining AC/DC generator in downtown San Francisco. In fact, in the entire country, you'd go up in the elevator room and it was like the analog, and it was click, 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 click. But the only problem was these elevators would break down at least 3 times a day.
Oh, right.
And they would break down with somebody in them. And they would like rattle and rattle. And I said, right, that was the managing director at the time. And like, we have to remodel these elevators. They're just like a tragedy waiting for to happen. You know Turkey a little bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
My dad has a place there. So they barter a lot.
Oh, absolutely. That's the way to do business.
First was like, barter, barter, barter. And they said, right, I found this company out of Texas. They're going to do like replace the elevators. And I'm like, Mike, we're in downtown San Francisco, like the union capital of the country. We can't afford to go with a company that's not out of California. And plus, they need a California business license. No, 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 Joe, we're going to be okay. They're cheap, cheap, cheap. The guys turned up. The work got shut down. The like unions are protesting outside the building each and every day. Like, you know, when they bang in the dustbin
Oh my
lids.
God, I can picture it. In New York, they bring a blow up rat. It's like twice the size of a human. It's really tall.
We had this for like 6 months because we had to wait for them to get their California license. It was just fun. And then another funny, chaotic story. Mike was over in Turkey, he calls me, he's like, oh, we need to buy a Steinway, Joanne. And I'm like, what's that? What's a Steinway?
A
He's like,
piano?
it's a piano. And he's like, and it needs to be white, a white Steinway. I'm like, okay, leave it with me. I'll start calling round. Steinways are quite they're not very common. And a white one is even rarer. And on top of that, they wanted it shipped to, I think it was the Prime Minister. One of the stands, it was Turkmenistan. And so we had to like buy this white piano and have it shipped. This was like a Monday, and we had to have it shipped by the end of the week. So then I was phoning Steinway in New York, and then I was being educated. They're like, Joe, we can't just ship a Steinway. Like when you find a white one, you have to ship it to the store in or its certified store. They have to tune it before they pack it, and to pack it takes an entire day. So that was kind of like some of the crazy stories of working with this company. But then apparently there was some deal that went down. I can't remember the exact nature of it, but Mike got replaced. And when he was leaving, he left a whole cellar full of champagne in the basement of this building. And nobody knew it was there. It was just like stacked to the rafters of like champagne, where he'd been like bartering all this stuff. That was all fun. It was easy, the flexibility with that job when Brian had been sick, and that was great. But then I wanted to get back into real estate development. And a good friend of mine, she just started working with a high net worth family in Silicon Valley. And she's like, oh, you got to come over and do this with me. And we were basically buying up buildings in a small downtown to like convert them into playful things for kids. And after 5 years of doing that, I was like, there's a housing crisis on our doorstep, on my doorstep. Here I am, just frolicking around with a bunch of buildings. I really want to be working in a sector where it's making a difference. And I want to understand why our housing crisis is getting so out of whack. And at that time, it was about 2018. My good friends who had hired me for this job, she phoned me up. She's like, I just come from an interview from a nonprofit, right up your alley. Plus, it's literally across the road from your house. But you know, it's nonprofit. How am I going to support a family, you know, being a single mom? And I went for the job. They were paying quite well, and I realized that I could take it. So that was at a company called Life Moves. They're one of the largest service providers in Silicon Valley, and they were looking for a real estate developer and somebody to oversee their portfolio. So they were operating about 18 shelters between San Mateo, Santa Clara County, but they also had two shelters that was adjacent to Google's Downtown West campus in San Jose. And it's a imagine, have you been to King's Cross recently? Have you seen the Google campus next to King's Cross?
No, no.
Yeah, it's like a big master plan, and San Jose was going to be the Grand Central Station of the West.
Oh.
It was like 2018, 2019. And they wanted somebody to redevelop or kind of negotiate with Google. And I'm like, well, this is great. I'll look after all these other buildings. But the diamond was like, making a flagship building that could really take like a dense building with big capacity to serve the homeless. And it would be like a campus. It wouldn't just be, hey, you're going to stay for a night or two. You're going to stay here with connection to services, and it's going to be like a holistic wellness center. So fast forward a couple of years, I'd been in that role. I'd done a lot of research on centers or like shelters, state-of-the-art shelters around the country, and there's not many of them. And we were heading into the end of 2019, and we'd gone and met with Google a couple of times. And then the last time they said, oh, we just want to meet with you, Joe. So I'm like, great. And it was the 14th of March, 2020. And I went down to Mountain View to do the meeting. And I walked in with this like concept. It was like a 6-story building. It was interim housing, emergency shelter, and a whole campus underneath. And I said, yeah, we're only asking for $100 million. It was this like great vision, Lucy, and I'm like, this is going to look so wicked next to your like downtown West campus. You're going to have state-of-the-art train station campus and the way to address our homeless crisis with this holistic wellness campus. And I said, it's about 100 million. And they said, okay, well, that's obviously above our pay grade. And then, so I left. And then the next day, we moved into the home and shelter in place, the SIP, shelter in place.
Yeah, COVID.
I was like, oh, well, I think that vision is gone. But by the way, we've got, we were serving about 500 people at that time in our shelters. I'm like, holy moly. We're like people exhibiting symptoms. So at that time, if you had a cough or cold and it was flu season, like everybody was shit scared. Staff was shit scared. The clients were shit scared. And it's like, how are we built? Like, and many of our shelters would congregate. So imagine like 2 or 3 people to a room, or like a room of bunk beds. So people were in close proximity. And we were fortunate to have a really forward-thinking board chair at the time, another person called Joe, board member called Elizabeth Funk, Joe Stockwell. And it's like, we need to build capacity and we need to do it quickly. And the only way I know is, bringing in like the mobile units, the construction trailers like you see on schools.
Yeah.
And we'll put them in the parking lots and we'll put some beds in. And so then Joe said, well, look, why don't, like, if you had some like rapidly deployable structures, we can move them around, and we called it hopscotch. So after like, a couple of months into the pandemic, we were meeting with folks in the industry about mobile trailers and such like. Because we didn't own the land, we needed something that was mobile. And so the modulars seemed to make most sense because they could be built in the factory whilst you were doing the site work. This was like March, April time. So to begin with, we literally bought construction trailers and put them on the sites where we had a parking lot, and we just put beds in them. And then Newsom came out with Project Room Key. That was where he was putting the homeless into the hotel rooms in downtown San Francisco. And then he's like, well, why am I paying them? Why don't I just buy the hotels? And that was how Project Home Key came about. We won't go after this grant. I'd called a couple of cities. They were not interested in our solution. But then we found out from LA, we qualified for this funding because we had a path to stability, a path to permanent housing, meaning when somebody comes into the shelter, you're connected to services and a case manager, and that case manager is going to work with you to develop a plan to get you into permanent housing. Because we had that connection, we could apply for this funding. And bear in mind, there's like 3 days to go before the funding deadline. And we thought, well, look, what do we have to lose? $10 million. So we stayed up like for 48 hours straight. Like Jemima was calling me. She's like, where are you? Like nobody's working. Where are you? So then we submitted the application. His office called me. Like, hello, this is Joanne. It's like, oh, this is Governor Newsom's office. We're like phoning to tell you that you've been awarded the Home Key project. So I'm like jumping up and down in the kitchen. It started construction in the December, and we had the grand opening May 5th.
Wow.
And that project became the catalyst, 16 of the modular projects in round two. And my phone was ringing off the hook. And then Elizabeth is an entrepreneur, and she was having conversations with her YPO group. And we're like, let's do it. Yeah, let's set up the company. So that was the genesis of us. So in round two, we built another two home key projects. And today, like we've only been formal, the agency was formed in November 2021. And at the end of this year, would have built 1,000 units and served over 1,000 people.
So explain to me how someone who's homeless would qualify for these homes.
There's about 650,000 people who are homeless in the United States today. But only about 200,000 of those people are what's called unsheltered. That means the others are in some sort of interim, transitional, or emergency overnight shelter. 200,000. So a third of all American homeless are unsheltered, yet half of those live in California. So California is really the epicenter of homelessness. We have about 180,000 people homeless and about 120,000 who are unsheltered. And our organization, Dignity Moves, is only focused on the unsheltered, because homelessness is very, very complex. But the unsheltered is the most visible, the most inhumane, and the easiest solved. And that's what we focused on. And as we got more and more educated around homelessness, the cost to society is actually twice as much leaving people outside. And there's several like studies that have shown this. The bulk of the cost of leaving someone on the streets is carried by our healthcare system. You know, when people just have a sprain or a bruise or they're feeling wheezy, they don't have doctors, they don't have access to like a normal medical system. So they go to the ER. So cost over time, it works out to be more like $80,000, $90,000 per year for a person experiencing chronic homelessness. And that's a lot of people on the streets of California today. And I often get asked, well, they don't want to come in. They're what's called service resistance. Actually, they're not. They're about 17% of the population have serious mental issues or challenges. And that's why they should be brought in. It's safer all around for the community, for themselves, and the people near them. The people with serious mental health issues are brought inside. And we can serve them in the communities we build. So we build what's called interim housing, and that's the tiny home you see. And when you come into one of those communities, the cost in high cost areas like Silicon Valley, it's about $100 per bed per night. If I go to jail, a lot of people like, oh, I'll just arrest them. The cost of being in jail overnight is $200. And then the cost of going into an ER visit is at least $8,500 a visit. So the math right now, we're spending millions on crises that might not be hitting a city's budget or the county's budget, but it hits society as a whole. It's like every state is experiencing a sharp uptick in homelessness. And that's to do with the shortage of housing, economic instability, and lack of social services. And that's also compounded by natural disasters and displacement through wars, immigration. But like the wildfires that happened on Hawaii, in fact, Hawaii has the fastest growing rate of homelessness in the entire country. which is surprising to a lot of people. So for every 10,000 people, about 80.5 people are homeless in Hawaii. And it's closely followed by DC, which is about 80 people for every 10,000. And have a guess what it is in California. It's
60?
47. So there's states now, many states who are above California in that increase in homelessness, because it's not just people who have fallen on bad times. It's not when, back in the 80s, they emptied the estate like asylums. It's because of the high cost of building housing and the shortage of housing, economic instability, and lack of social services.
I think Dignity Moves is an absolutely fantastic organization. It says here on the website, a place where people can get out of survival mode, take a breath, and have the mental and emotional capacity to focus on stabilizing and rebuilding their lives. Amazing. You're amazing, Joe. It's not easy being a single mum. Where did you find relief? Where did you find community? I know you're fiercely independent, but everyone needs someone now and again. Where did you find that?
I'm pretty independent. It's hard for me to ask for help. But where I got it the most was at the yoga studio. So I've been going to the Yoga Health Center in San Carlos for almost 18 years when we moved here. So I was pregnant with Jemima. So yoga got me strong physically, mentally, and many of my friends are out of yoga, like my solid good friends. And like my friend Kelly got me through. And Yvette being on it, like I wish Yvette and Toby lived closer.
Well, at least we're all in America. Isn't it wild? We
Yeah.
all ended up here. And you live where I went to college. Okay, Joe, I ask all my guests the same question. What music are you listening to right now that moves you? What's on your playlist?
Oh, it's that Dom Dollar. Like I still love all my housey music. I'm probably going to see Enzo is Burning next Saturday night. Oasis in September, and then there's some like really cool day parties. They have do more day parties now in San Francisco for like the people over 50, which is perfect. And then we can get our night sleeping.
I love that. No, Annie Mac has been doing like sessions that end at, 11. I'm into that. Or it can end at 10, actually. That's better for me.
They had Fisher played. So now with May Laurie and even Matt Mahan in San Jose, they're doing block parties. So they had a DJ called Fisher, who's pretty big. He's kind of like Dom Dollar, John Summit-esque. And they closed like the whole street
I
down.
love that you're still into your dance music.
I saw Mark Knight. I saw Green Velvet last December. Really good.
What a life story you have, Joe. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Anytime. Anytime.
Oh, yeah, it's good to see your beautiful face.
Oh, thank you. And
Yeah.
how's Spencer and Violet?
Oh, they're magic. They're wonderful. Yeah, I saved the best for last, honey.
I love that.